Everyone, let's talk about immigration. Immigration is a very fascinating topic for me because of all of the hysteria that surrounds it. It's what really makes the subject so interesting. How immigration, when it is at a massive level, can cause a lot of hysteria, it can cause a lot of tribalism and nationalism. And it's interesting to see how immigration, the reality of immigration, is used as a way to spark nationalist sentiment and racialist sentiments, tribalist ideologies, and all of that stuff. It's pretty crazy. Anytime you have massive amounts of immigration, you always have a gang of opportunists who pop up. And they use the situation as a way to spark nationalism. And the reality is that this is really just a strategy by which to bolster up their own position and to grab power. It's a play of power. It's a strategy of gaining power and influence over people. And it really is quite remarkable how every single time these people get away with it. I mean, every single time these opportunists, these gangs, this posse of manipulative and just evil people get away with it. They do this. They've been doing this in American history for a long time. If you look at the history of immigration in the United States, you have always had the Sargon of Akkads and the Stephen Molyneux. You have always had the Mark Levines and the Michael Savages and the Rush Limbaughs. You've always had these people. They've always been around. There's nothing new under the sun. You can go all the way back in the history of this country and you will find these types of people. When you had a large amount of German immigration into the United States, there was all sorts of hysteria around that. And then you had the Irish, and you had people like Louis Levine. Yes, Louis Levine, same last name as Mark Levine. Louis Levine came around and talked about how the Irish were essentially agents of the Vatican, how they were going to transform America into becoming a colony of the papacy. And a lot of people believed this rhetoric. They were called nativists or the know-nothings. And they ended up being quite violent, and they destroyed a lot of churches in Philadelphia in the mid-1800s, and they also killed people. And then, of course, you had the Chinese, and it was the Yellow Scare. The Chinese were going to destroy the United States. And then it was the Italians. The Italians were violent, evil papists, and they were going to destroy the United States as well. They were a threat. And it just so happens that all these people today are extremely integrated. Extremely integrated. Chinese Americans, Italian Americans. And now it's the Middle Easterners, the Muslims, and the Mexicans. Ever since 9/11, the Muslims have been the easiest scapegoats in the planet. Even if you look at what's happening in India right now, the Indian government is pushing this whole policy of a citizen registry. And if you are an immigrant and you are a Hindu, they want to make your path to Indian citizenship very expedient. But if you are a Muslim, well, it doesn't apply to you. And so Muslim immigrants are going to be, if this sort of thing is applied and is imposed, Muslim immigrants would be stuck in the realm of non-citizen, and they won't be given the privileges that a citizen is bestowed, is given, is bequeathed. And they're using Islamic terrorism and immigration as a way to justify all of this. And make no mistake about it, if you look at the crazy Hindu fanatics, they hate Christians just as much as they do Muslims. And so don't think, oh, look, these Hindus, they're heroes fighting against the Islamization of India. Oh, no, those people will turn against Christians just as viciously. Makes you wonder about supporting fascism for a good cause, which is it's really a labyrinth that a lot of people get stuck into. It's a web that a lot of people get stuck into. Well, yes, we know these people are fascist, but we have to support them because they are going to fight off this other enemy that we have. But the enemy of my enemy is still my enemy. And those people will turn against you just as viciously as they turned against the people that you wanted them to turn against. And so, of course, you have all the opportunists, the talkers in talk radio, who go on and on and on about Mexican immigration and how it's a threat to the United States. Again, same type of people that we saw in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And it's all very fascinating how talk radio is dominated by the right. If you know anything about the industry of talk radio, you'll know that the left is pretty much on the losing side. The right dominates talk radio. And therefore, the right, in the context of talk radio, dominates the narrative when it comes to immigration. And so when you have massive amounts of immigration in a country, it has very good effects. Immigration does help an economy, it does help a society, but the problem isn't immigration. The problem is all of the opportunists who come around like vultures, looking at the situation as a means to a nefarious end, and that is fomenting tribalist sentiment in the society. And this has always been a reality in the midst of intense immigration situations. So I want to read to you guys some lines from a book that I'm currently reading. It's called White Backlash, and it's an in-depth study on the political effects of immigration on a society. Basically, how political entities use immigration for their own nationalistic agendas. So far, it has been quite an interesting read, but I just wanted to read to you guys some lines from it. And this really doesn't just apply to the United States. It applies really to everywhere, because the political opportunists who take advantage of the situation of mass immigration, they're everywhere. I mean, you can even go to Africa and you'll find stuff like this. South Africans don't like Nigerians. And I'm not talking about white South Africans. I'm talking about black South Africans. They will have hatred for Nigerians because Nigerians come to South Africa and make lots of money, supposedly. You can go to the Dominican Republic and you will find Dominicans hating and even being very violent against Haitians. You see this all over the place. You can go to Japan, you will see videos of Japanese Japanese nationalists attacking Koreans, and also talking about how they want to purge Japan of all of the Korean immigrants and all that stuff. So in this book it says, whites who are fearful of immigration tend to respond to that anxiety with a measurable shift to the political right. This book, by the way, was written in 2015. This is the same year that the migrant crisis occurred in Europe. What happened as a result of the migrant crisis? It acted as a catalyst towards this very violent shift towards the right that really it reverberated throughout Western Europe. I mean, it's come to the point that now in Spain, a right-wing party called the Vox, which at one point in time was very obscure and had not a single seat in the Spanish parliament, now has 52 seats in the Spanish parliament, out of a parliament of 350 seats. 52 seats out of 350 is quite substantial. In fact, I actually had the opportunity of having dinner with the vice president of Vox. His name is Victor Gonzalez. And I actually had dinner with him. I was in a conference in Madrid, and he wanted to talk to me because he liked the stuff that I was saying. And he told me that he was leading a political party. And I said, oh, how many seats do you guys have? He goes, none. We're still a very small party, but you see, we're going to make it big. And the guy knew what he was talking about. He really did make it big. It's quite surreal that a guy that I had met back in 2015 now is running one of the biggest parties in Spain. And it's the first time for a long time that a right-wing party has won so many seats in the Spanish parliament. You saw the rise of the AFD, the rise of the Freedom Party, the rise of the Austrian People's Party, the Sweden Democrats. All of these parties, the Hungarian nationalists with Viktor Orban and all that stuff, Brexit, all of this stuff was really accelerated by the migrant crisis. So this study knows what it's talking about. It's really quite fascinating to read this then to look at what's happening around you and say, yeah, we're actually seeing this phenomena manifest before our eyes. It also says in this book, this is another part that I found fascinating. So the numbers, when it comes to how American society sees immigration, the numbers are really quite remarkable. So it says here, when given the choice between primarily moving in the direction of integrating illegal immigrants into American society or in the direction of stricter enforcement against illegal immigration, almost 70% choose stricter enforcement. So people say, oh, these people are illegal. And then they'll say, well, we're not racist. We just want them to come here legally. So then we'll say, well, they've been living here for years. They've paid taxes. They've been working for years. Why not just give them a path to citizenship? Oh, no, no, no. They would rather have stricter immigration policy. So if you want them to be legal, then how about being in favor for putting them through a process? Oh, no, no, they don't want that. They would rather have stricter border security, because it's not really about legal versus illegal. It's really about tribalism. And I remember years ago, we're talking way back, like when I was in high school, I was actually in the car with some of my father's friends, and there was this lady there who was going on and on and on about illegal immigration and how it's destroying the United States. It's the biggest thing ever. Biggest thing. And we were stuck in traffic, and on the side of the road was a Mexican guy selling ice cream in a little ice cream cart, and he had a little bell in his hand and all that. Ding, 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 ding. And my dad asked this lady a very simple question. Which would you rather have, a Muslim terrorist who comes into the United States legally, or this Mexican guy who comes in selling ice cream and he's here illegally? Which would you choose? And she said, well, because the Muslim terrorist is legal, I would choose the Muslim terrorist. Yes, she actually said this. This is the depths of hysteria that a lot of these people go into. And, you know, this is what happens when you allow talk radio to poison your brain. And I'm not, you know, looking down on these people. I was there at one point in time in my high school years. When I was in junior high, I used to listen to Michael Savage all the time. It came to the point where I was listening to Michael Savage every single day. I loved listening to his show because he was so entertaining, and I agreed with him on the things that he said about illegal immigration. And then one day Michael Savage started talking about genetics and IQ and intelligence, and about how the Ashkenazi Jew has inherited the highest levels of intelligence and all that stuff. And I realized at that point, oh my goodness, I've been listening to a racist and a eugenist this entire time. And he said, like, you know, in these studies, it shows how the Ashkenazis, you know, they inherit the highest IQs and all that Amrin garbage. You know, then you look at not American Renaissance, American Renaissance. You look at Breitbart and how they were working with Stephen Miller, and Stephen Miller was telling them to talk more about immigration, and boost more and more articles about immigration and the dangers of immigration. And the sources that Miller was using was Amrin and VDare, both openly eugenist websites and publications. And it really goes to show you that this hysteria, when it comes to immigration, it's rooted in racism. It's rooted in tribalism. And that's not to say that everyone who subscribes to these types of websites or listens to these types of shows are automatically racist. I used to listen to these types of shows. Michael Savage, never VDare or anything that crazy, but Michael Savage. And then once I saw the reality, I was like, oh, I'm done with this garbage. So it goes on to say 60% of Americans approve of Arizona's controversial SB 1070, commonly referred to as the Show Me Your Papers law, since it enables law enforcement officials to stop anyone who they suspect is in the country without legal status. A clear majority would like to see a similar law requiring police to verify legal status in their state, and a similarly large majority supports building a fence along 700 miles of the border with Mexico. And this study regarding the border idea, the border wall, this study was done in 2011, around the time that Romney and Obama were going against each other in the 2012 election, and Romney was nowhere near as strong against immigration as Donald Trump was, and that's why Romney lost. The reality is that Trump tapped into a sentiment that was very real and very, very deep. And if you look at these numbers, they'll say, oh, these statistics, they're conflated or they're exaggerated. Well, if that's the case, then how come you see similar numbers favoring the idea of a border wall? And Trump capitalized on that so well and used it to get his electoral victory. The numbers are very strong. And so the reality is that when it comes to this whole immigration stuff, they use immigration. They use some of the problems that come with immigration, criminals across the border, regardless of the fact that the majority of migrants aren't criminals. The majority of immigrants, illegal or legal, are not violent people. Nonetheless, they will find all the stories about illegals doing crimes, and they will sit there and say, oh, look at this, and now every single migrant is suspect. Every single migrant is guilty until proven innocent. But the reality is that you see this throughout history. You see this throughout history, and every single time you have a wave of migration in the United States, you have this gang of opportunists. It never fails. Happens every single time. Same opportunists. And so really this whole thing that we're seeing today, it's no different. It's just another immigration scare, and it's being exploited. And who is falling for it? Well, not you, because you're watching this video, so you wouldn't be falling for it if you watched this. But a lot of you, I would say that at least a good amount of you do fall for this sort of thing. And I'm not looking down on you. I'm trying to help you guys. Don't fall for these opportunists, because just like in the 1800s, 1900s, people were doing this sort of thing. And it's interesting, the 1924 immigration law, it was completely rooted in eugenics. It basically said, we want people from Northern Europe. We don't want Southern or Eastern Europeans coming into the United States. We want Northern Europeans, kind of like how Trump said, we don't want people from Africa. Why don't we get people in from Norway? As if, we have swarms of Norwegians just begging to come into the United States. And it's very interesting. The 1924 Immigration Act was used to block Jewish refugees from entering the United States when they were trying to escape the Nazi reign of terror. And under which party was the 1924 Immigration Act passed? It was done under a Republican administration, and the people behind it were Republicans. So that flies right into the face of this whole trope about, oh, the Democrats are the racists, the Republicans aren't, which is just a giant trope, and it's historically retarded because both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party have extremely racist histories. And the bottom line is that if you look at the anti-immigrant sentiments that were being fomented in the 19th century, you will find Republicans very much involved in that. If you look at what was happening in the 20th century, you will find Republicans behind anti-immigration hysteria. Republicans were doing this, Democrats were doing this. But the Republicans today want to play this blame game strategy and say, oh no, the Democrats were all racist, the Republicans weren't. And that's just historically inept. And what's scary and what's really interesting at the same time is how the Republican Party has continued this legacy. They haven't stopped. The whole obsession with immigration was happening in the 1900s. The whole obsession immigration, the immigration obsession that a lot of Republicans have today, well, they had it back in the 1920s, and that's why they passed that 1924 immigration policy. And that's why you will hear American right-wingers today saying, why don't we go back to that 1924 policy? Wasn't that just amazing?
My preference would be for the president to zero in on the border, to zero in on immigration and stop this. We are being invaded. We're being invaded by a bunch of people that that has the potential here to totally destroy the makeup of our culture and the makeup of our society. And the Democrat Party and the American left are in total support of this. It's got to stop. The president got elected on that issue, and it's not solved. The wall has not been built, and the border is still wide open. It needs to be shut down. You know, we stopped immigration in this country from the 1920s through 1965 to allow those who had immigrated in the 40 previous years to assimilate. There isn't any assimilation happening here. And I think that ought to be his primary focus issue-wise.
So that legacy has continued on. So think about this stuff the next time you hear this sort of hysteria and try to understand that it's just the same pattern of manipulation, and it's really the same pattern of this strategy of gaining power through fear and gaining influence by making you think that the anti-immigrant activists are the heroes and the immigrant is the enemy of your nation. So, yeah, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.